When my parents invited me to our annual Christmas dinner, I knew it would be a disaster. But nothing could have prepared me for the humiliation they had planned. What started as a simple family gathering quickly turned into a cruel reminder that no matter how much I accomplished, I would never be seen as an equal. And when they told me at 29 years old to sit at the kids' table, I realized something. This wasn't just about dinner. This was about control. About power. About keeping me in my place. But what they didn't expect was that this time I wasn't going to stay silent. And by the time the night was over, they would regret ever trying to put me in that chair. I pulled up to the grand Victorian house, its windows glowing with warm light, the wreath on the door perfectly arranged, the front steps dusted free of snow. It looked like a Christmas card. But I knew better. Behind that picture-perfect exterior was a family that had spent years making me feel like I didn't belong. I stepped inside, the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon filling the air. Laughter echoed from the dining room, the kind of forced, polished laughter that only ever existed when guests were around. My mother was the first to greet me, her lips curling into that familiar tight-lipped smile. "Oh, Olivia. You made it," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like an obligation than affection. "We weren't sure if you'd come this year, given your busy lifestyle." There it was. The first jab of the evening. I forced a smile, pretending not to notice. I wouldn't miss it, I lied. The living room was a scene straight out of a holiday movie, ornate decorations, a crackling fireplace, perfectly wrapped presents stacked neatly under the tree. And there, at the center of it all, were my siblings basking in their own perfection. Ethan, my oldest brother, stood by the dining table with his wife, both of them effortlessly glamorous, their 3 kids running circles around them. "Oh look, Olivia's here," he said, his tone dripping with amusement as if my presence was a rare phenomenon. Rachel, my sister, looked up from adjusting her baby's bow. "No +1, she asked, her voice innocent, but her smirk anything but. I clenched my jaw and shrugged. "Nope. Just me." My father, sitting at the head of the beautifully set dining table, barely spared me a glance. "Let's get everyone seated," he announced, the authority in his voice making it clear that even at a family gathering, he was still the one in charge. I took a step toward the table, glancing at the elegantly arranged place settings, the flickering candlelight reflecting off the fine china. For a brief second, I thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me as an equal. Maybe I'd finally have a seat at the table. Then my mother's hand landed gently on my arm. "Olivia, sweetie," she said, her voice soft, sugary, fake. "We saved a special seat for you, over there." I followed her gaze. The kids' table. A rickety fold-out table in the corner, covered in a plastic holiday-themed tablecloth, surrounded by booster seats and sippy cups. A plate of half-mashed potatoes and overcooked carrots sat waiting for me next to a toddler who was currently using his fingers to scoop peas into his mouth. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, the humiliation washing over me in slow, burning waves. My mother smiled, tilting her head, waiting for me to obey like I always had. The room was silent. My siblings exchanged amused glances, my father sipped his wine, the kids chattered on, oblivious. I forced myself to breathe. Forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat. And then, with a smile as tight as my mother's, I said, "Sure. Thanks, Mom." I walked over, my footsteps slow, measured, controlled. I lowered myself onto the too small plastic chair, my knees practically hitting my chest, and picked up the flimsy plastic fork. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to make a scene. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Not yet. Because tonight, for the first time, I wasn't going to sit there and take it. Tonight, I was going to show them exactly what happens when you push someone too far. I sat at the kids' table, gripping the cheap plastic fork like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. The air around me buzzed with conversation, but none of it included me. My siblings chatted about their kids, their promotions, their picture-perfect lives, while my parents beamed at them with pride. It was a well-rehearsed performance, and like always, I was just an afterthought. I stared at my plate, a half-hearted scoop of mashed potatoes, a piece of turkey that looked like it had been cut as an afterthought, and a few sad, limp green beans. A stark contrast to the gourmet dishes set before the adults. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. No, not this year. A giggle from across the table snapped me out of my thoughts. A 3-year-old cousin was smearing gravy across her face, blissfully unaware of the quiet humiliation unfolding in front of her. I forced a breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I heard it. "She should be grateful she even got a seat," Ethan muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Rachel to stifle a laugh. Something inside me snapped. Slowly, deliberately, I set down my fork. The scrape of plastic against the tablecloth was barely audible, but in my head it was deafening. My hands no longer shook. My heart no longer raced. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me like the calm before a storm. I pushed back my chair, the cheap plastic legs scraping against the floor. The room didn't fall silent, not yet. But a few heads turned. I stood up. Then, without a word, I walked toward the front door. First, no one reacted. They thought I was going to the bathroom or stepping out for air. But when I reached for my coat, the one I had barely taken off, something shifted. "Olivia?" My mother called, the first hint of unease creeping into her voice. I didn't stop. "Olivia, where are you going?" Still, I didn't answer. Then came my father's voice, sharp and authoritative. "Sit back down. We're having dinner." I turned. For the first time all night, they were all looking at me. Really looking at me. My mother's forced smile had vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. Ethan and Rachel exchanged a glance, waiting to see if I'd do something dramatic. My father, ever the patriarch, stared at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. I met his gaze head-on. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady, unshaken. A hush fell over the room. My mother let out a nervous chuckle. "Oh, don't be silly, sweetheart. Sit down and eat. You're making a scene." I almost laughed. That was the irony, wasn't it? They had been making a scene out of me my whole life. I shook my head. "No, Mom. What's silly is a 29-year-old woman being told to sit at the kids' table. What's silly is pretending I belong in a family that refuses to see me as an adult." My father's expression darkened. "Enough of this nonsense. Sit down." I took a slow breath. "No." One word. One syllable. But it held a lifetime of resentment. A lifetime of being dismissed, belittled, and ignored. I turned on my heel, pulled open the front door, and stepped into the cold night air. "Olivia!" My mother's voice rang out, sharp and desperate. "You're overreacting. Come back here right now." I didn't look back. The icy wind bit at my skin as I walked down the driveway, but I barely felt it. The only thing I felt was the weight lifting off my chest with every step I took. Then came the buzzing. My phone vibrated wildly in my pocket. First one notification, then another, then another. They were texting me. I reached my car and slid into the driver's seat, but I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and glanced at the screen. A dozen missed calls. Even more unread messages. "Ethan, this is ridiculous. Stop being dramatic and come back." "Rachel, Mom is freaking out. You're ruining Christmas." "Dad, enough with the attitude. Get back here now." Then, finally, the one from my mother. "Olivia, this isn't funny. You're being selfish. You're making this about you." I let out a slow breath, staring at the screen. Selfish. That was always their go-to, wasn't it? The moment I stopped playing along, the moment I stood up for myself, I became the villain. I should have been upset. But instead, a strange sense of amusement washed over me. They had spent years making me feel small, insignificant. And now they were panicking because, for the first time, I wasn't playing my part. I smirked, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. They wanted a reaction. They were about to get one. But not in the way they expected. Before I tell you exactly what I did next, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where your own family made you feel invisible? If you've ever had to stand up for yourself, hit that like button. And if you think I made the right choice walking away, let me know in the comments. Trust me, this story is far from over. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching my phone screen light up with notification after notification. Each text, each missed call was another desperate attempt to pull me back in. For years, I had let them dictate how I was supposed to feel, how I was supposed to behave. Tonight, I had finally broken free, and they couldn't handle it. The cold air seeped into the car, but I barely noticed. My mind was too busy replaying the night, every little moment leading up to my decision to leave. The fake smiles, the condescending remarks, the quiet laughter when they thought I wouldn't hear. The worst part? None of it surprised me. Deep down, I had always known they saw me as less. But tonight, they had made it clear that they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I took a slow, deep breath, then exhaled, watching the fog form on the windshield. I could turn the engine on. I could drive away and leave them behind, at least for tonight. But something inside me stirred. A restless energy. A sharp-edged clarity that told me this wasn't over. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the messages, my fingers hovering over the screen. I could ignore them, block their numbers, walk away and let them sit in their discomfort. But no, that was too easy. They had spent years painting me as the difficult one, the dramatic one, the disappointment. If that was the role they wanted me to play, maybe it was time to give them a performance they wouldn't forget. I tapped into the family group chat, the same one they used to parade their perfect lives, to remind me of all the ways I had fallen short. There were already messages piling up, frustration simmering beneath their words. Ethan, you need to apologize to Mom. She's upset. Rachel. This is so immature, Olivia. You ruined dinner. Dad. I expect you back here first thing in the morning so we can talk about your behavior. And then, finally, my mother's message. Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. Your siblings are worried. We just want to have a nice Christmas as a family. You're making it difficult. I let the words sink in, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. They still didn't get it. They thought this was about a chair. They thought I had stormed out over something petty, something childish. But this was bigger than a seat at the table. This was about years of being dismissed, about a lifetime of being treated like I was less. I scrolled up through the chat, past their angry texts, past the carefully curated photos of their picture-perfect lives, and stopped at an old family photo from years ago. Christmas Eve. Everyone dressed in matching sweaters, smiling for the camera. Everyone except me. I remembered that night. I had been shoved to the side, barely fitting into the frame, because there wasn't enough space at the center. I tapped on the photo, then started typing beneath it. Here's to another year of making sure I know exactly where I stand. And then I hit send. Almost immediately, the chat exploded. Ethan. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Rachel. Oh my God. Olivia. Stop making this a big deal. Dad. Delete that picture. Now. Mom. Olivia, we need to talk. This isn't fair. Fair. That word sent a bitter laugh to my lips. I set my phone down and turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, and as I pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the glowing windows of that perfect house, I felt something settle inside me. I didn't regret leaving. I didn't regret standing up for myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running away. I was walking away on my own terms. I drove for miles without a destination, the glow of streetlights passing in a blur. The adrenaline had started to fade, leaving behind a strange, hollow feeling. Not regret, no, I didn't regret leaving, but something else. A realization, maybe, the kind that settled deep in your chest and refused to let go. For years, I had convinced myself that if I just tried harder, if I proved myself enough, they would finally see me as an equal. I had built a life for myself outside of them. A career I was proud of, friendships that felt more like family than my own blood ever had. But none of it mattered to them. In their eyes, success wasn't measured in independence. It was measured in marriage licenses and baby announcements, in how well I fit into the mold they had crafted for me. And because I had never followed their script, I had never truly belonged. The diner came into view, a small roadside place with neon signs flickering in the cold night. It wasn't fancy, but it was open, and right now, I needed somewhere to sit, to think, to breathe. I pulled into the lot, cut the engine, and stepped inside. The place was nearly empty, save for an older couple tucked into a booth and a lone waitress wiping down the counter. The scent of coffee and fried food hung in the air, warm and familiar. I slid into a corner booth, resting my hands on the table, staring blankly at the laminated menu. I wasn't hungry. I just needed a moment to exist without expectation. The waitress wandered over, her tired eyes scanning me like she'd seen 100 people just like me before. People escaping something, looking for a quiet place to figure things out. She poured me a cup of coffee without asking, setting it down with a knowing nod before walking away. Steam curled from the cup as I wrapped my hands around it, the warmth grounding me. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the table. I ignored it. For the first time all night, I didn't care what they had to say. Outside, snow had started to fall, drifting lazily past the streetlights. I watched as the flakes melted against the window, feeling the tension in my body slowly unravel. This was what peace felt like. Not forced smiles and whispered judgments. Not playing a part in a family that had never truly made space for me. I had spent so many years fighting for a place at their table. Tonight, I finally realized I didn't need it. I never had. The coffee had gone cold by the time I finally picked up my phone. The screen was still flooded with messages, each one blending into the next. Anger, frustration, guilt. The same cycle, the same attempts to pull me back into their world. I scrolled through them slowly, reading each word without feeling anything at all. Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion. You know we love you, right? Dad. This little stunt of yours was unnecessary. Family is family, Olivia. You don't just walk away. Rachel, you need to apologize to Mom. She was just trying to keep the peace. Ethan, unbelievable. You made Christmas all about you. Hope you're happy. I should have been angry. Maybe a part of me was. But mostly I felt free. They still didn't get it. They never would. In their eyes I was the problem. Not the way they treated me. Not the years of condescension, the carefully disguised jabs, the way they had always made me feel like an outsider in my own family. No, to them I was the one ruining things. I set my phone down, staring at it for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I left the group chat. The moment my thumb pressed the button, a weight lifted off my chest. There was no dramatic farewell, no final speech. Just silence. And in that silence, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. The diner was still quiet, the hum of the coffee machine and the soft clatter of dishes filling the space around me. The waitress passed by again, pausing just long enough to offer me a small smile. Anything else? I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No, I'm good. And for the first time in years, I actually meant it. I paid the bill, pulled on my coat, and stepped outside. The snow had thickened, covering the streets in a soft, untouched layer of white. My car sat under a street lamp, its windshield dusted with fresh flakes. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, crisp and clean. There was no going back. No more trying to fit into a space that had never been meant for me. Christmas wasn't ruined. It was just different. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best gift I could have given myself. The biggest lesson here? You don't have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. Olivia spent years trying to fit into a space that was never meant for her. But the truth is, sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Now, I want to hear from you. If you think Olivia made the right choice, comment 2. If you think she should have handled it differently, comment 7. And if you've ever been in a similar situation, share your story below. Hit that like button if this resonated with you, and subscribe to Mr.HeartVibes for more powerful stories like this. Because in the end, we all deserve a place where we're truly valued.